1, 2, 3, 4. When I was young, I had a lot to say. So I learned how to sing, I learned how to play. You said you were mine when you heard my song. After all these years, you still sing along. The first time, the best time, the good times to come. Those three things we'll never forget.
Hi, my name is Maria Belcher, and I'm the Executive Director at FestivALL, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Three Things. We have three amazing guests this evening who will be showing us their first, their favorite, and their future. What I love most about Three Things is that you get a sneak peek behind the scenes and get to hear about a part of these artists' lives that you may not otherwise have the opportunity to do so. So a huge thank you to Mr. Jeff Shirley, the creator and producer of Three Things, for starting this, and it's been a pleasure to have under the FestivALL lineup of programs for the last 4 years and for this special episode during FestivALL's VirtuALL. I'd like to thank the sponsors of Three Things for helping make this episode and this season happen. We invite you to check out the full schedule of events at festivallcharleston.com. We have 15 days full of art, music, theater, dance, family fun, and so much more for you to enjoy June 14th through the 28th. And a special thank you to local artist Ian Bodie for creating the artwork that you see here featuring the three guests for this evening. But without further ado, I will bring onto the virtual stage the creator and producer of Three Things, Mr. Jeff Shirley.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you, FestivALL, for having Three Things be a part of your year-round programming of the last 4 years. 5 years ago, when I started Three Things, it was basically a real simple idea. It was just a way to have some people come in and tell another group of people some stories. The theme is first, favorite, and future. And what I hope the audience gets from that, those stories from these people, is how they got started in their chosen field, what they love about their career, and where they plan on taking it in the future. I don't give my guests very much instruction other than to follow the theme of first, favorite, and future. And that is, we've found, gives us some very different perspectives on the task, very different approaches. And you will see that today, where three guests will give us three completely different approaches to the task. I don't like to talk too much, so let's start with our very first guest, Larry Groce, host of West Virginia Public Broadcasting's Mountain Stage radio show, which is heard on over 250 stations around the country and has been a staple of public broadcasting for 37 years now. Larry is a repeat guest. The first year we had Three Things, our attendance was light, to say the least. It was a long road at the beginning. And Larry spoke that year, and it was wonderful, but there were probably 20 people in the audience that night. So I'm going to spend some time revisiting those first year guests, and Larry is the first one that we're going to do as a repeat Three Things person. And that first time when I introduced Larry, I introduced him pretty simply as the smartest and funniest person that I know. And I think I'll just add a third thing to that, and I would like to say that Larry Groce, the funniest and smartest and most generous person that I know at this point, is going to come on and tell us about his first, favorites, and futures. And you'll see in Larry's, he'll focus a little bit more on the firsts than some of the other guests, but that'll just go to show that how the different approaches to the task come out. So let's hear about Larry Groce's first, favorite, and future.
Well, thanks very much, Jeff, and welcome, whoever you are, to Three Things. I'm one of three folks that'll be talking with you tonight, and whenever you do this, I've actually done it before, and I appreciate Jeff giving me a chance to do it again. I did it the first year. We're in the fifth year now, and at first year there weren't many people that came around, but now there's a lot of folks that come and listen, and I've been to maybe 75% of them. I've seen so many people, and they're always interesting because you hear about things that you probably would never ask people about. So I'm going to try to do some of that tonight and tell you some things that you may not want to ask me, or you may not even be interested in, but I'm going to tell them to you anyway. Since my life has been a life of music, then it's all going to be about music and how I got into music and how I first got into music, some of my favorite things about music, and then of course my future in music and wherever else is left for me. Let me start out when I was a little boy. The first music I remember was my mother and father singing to me. Mom sang to me by bedside. My dad played the guitar a little bit, and he played songs like Home on the Range. I remember the Tennessee Waltz, You Are My Sunshine. And it's interesting because some of these songs showed up much later when I did some albums for Disney, and I'll get to in a little while. Those are some of the first memories I have. I was probably around 3 years old when I heard that. We moved to another house when I was 6 years old, and Dad used to play there also. But he was kind of quitting by that time. He didn't play much on the guitar, but his father played fiddle, and his mother played Hawaiian guitar. I never heard his mother play, but I heard his father play fiddle a few times, my grandfather. So we moved to the new house, and at the new house, we had more modern conveniences and whatever, and we had a big record player that was built into a cabinet like people used to have all the time. And I remember the very first records that I heard. It must have been, let me see, it was in 1956. I made some notes, looked it up. I talked to my mother today, by the way, who's 93, and asked her to verify some of this. In 1956, she played me Hank Williams, Hey Good Looking, and she played me some novelty songs like Three Little Fishes by Kay Kaiser and his orchestra, who also I ran into later in life, and things like Big Butter and Eggman. Louis Armstrong recorded that kind of strange novelty songs, which once again show up later in my life. But the first record that I remember very well because of what it looked like was this one here. You'll also see my first guitar, but there it is right there. It's Sun Records, and it's Carl Perkins singing Blue Suede Shoes. And I remember it very well because my mother wanted me to somehow, she had a club or something, she wanted me as a little boy of what I would have been then, 8 years old, she wanted me to kind of, I guess, lip sync it and pretend like I was Elvis Presley. She had Carl Perkins' version, but she liked Elvis Presley better. So anyway, I didn't do that. But that was the first single that I remember having. Then I listened to a lot of my parents' records, including ones like this. They love musicals. They love Frank Sinatra and all that stuff. So we listened to Guys and Dolls. If you've ever seen, that was the original recording, I believe. And I love that. I listened to a lot of those kind of things. Bells Are Ringing. And then when I got to be a little bit older, 10 years old or so, I started listening to, in 1958 and 59, I started listening to the commercial folk music, like a lot of people did, and I listened to the Kingston Trio, which they influenced a lot of folks. Hope you like my high-tech graphics here. They influenced a lot of people. I noticed later on in music, all through music, from Stephen Stills on down the line to the Byrds and somebody else. Kingston Trio were influential. And they're easy to make fun of, but they played a lot of cool songs. And Tom Dooley was on the radio. That's where I first heard it, I think. Started listening to that kind of music, and very much square, white, folk music. But they also had some ethnic feel because they listened to a lot of different music of themselves and played some things, especially from the Caribbean. That's why they got the name Kingston, I guess. But I listened to them for about 4 years, and during that time, by the way, I'll give you a little aside here, since we're talking about firsts. 1960, I went to the first Dallas Cowboys game. Just throw that in there for you. My first guitar, you already saw it, 1961. I asked my mother about it today. And there it is, the K archtop guitar. Just like that one right there. I don't have it anymore, but that's exactly what it looked like. It played pretty well. She got that for me. Mom and Dad got it for me for Christmas because she said I wanted to play violin, but she thought guitar was more manly. Pretty interesting. And also I could play it by myself. But I'm glad she got me a guitar because I started learning guitar not with lessons, but from my friends. And we learned together. We had a bunch of friends that play guitar, so we would learn chords, we would learn something else. My grandfather taught me the first 3 chords, but after that, I basically learned from my friends. So that was my first guitar. And then I began to listen to all kinds of records. I had friends that were older than me, and one of them, as a matter of fact, had a brother who was older than him. So when I was in my early teens, my parents were very straight, very, square. They were hip was not their thing, except for Frank Sinatra hip, they were like that. But when it came to folk music and stuff, they didn't know anything about that. But my friends did, and one of my friends' brother was really kind of like a beatnik, because we're still back there in the late 50s. And so I learned from that some of the ethnic music, and Pete Seeger and a lot of the old-time music. I started listening to some of that. And then I started listening to singer-songwriters, and for whatever reason, I came across the person who influenced my music more than anybody else. So in 1962, when I was 14, I bought this record. It's been the most influential record in my life. It started, at least, most influential. I found out there's only 2,500 people bought this record. How I got it in Dallas, Texas, I really don't know, but I bought it, I had it, I listened to it. There was only a couple of original songs. Most of them were old songs, Baby Let Me Follow You Down, I See That My Grapes Kept Playing. I can't remember what they were on there, but since then, been a Bob Dylan fan, and his music and his songs have been the biggest influence on me and on my life. And I started writing songs about that time. I wrote my first song in 1962, and it was kind of in the style of the folk guys. It had a message. Now is the time for people to, get better, or whatever it is. And then in 1963, I got my first good guitar, really good guitar. And I'm not going to show you a picture of it because here it is, right here. It's a Martin D28 that I went in to buy a Martin D18 because they were cheaper, because I hadn't even tuned this. But I got a D28 because it was used in 1963, and that pickguard wasn't original on it, but matter of fact, a lot of things have been replaced because I've had it all of these years and played it for many years. That was my first good guitar, that D28. And I was playing it with my friends, and some people had some good guitars, Gibsons and Martins, and so that was a big deal for us. That sound was really super evocative to us. Also, back around that time, I began to hear songs from a guy who I had no knowledge about, but played a big role in my life later on, and that's Billy Ed Wheeler. I never knew what West Virginia was, where it was, or anything else, but I loved Billy Ed Wheeler songs, and Kingston Trio sang them, Judy Collins sang them, Judy Hinsky sang them. I heard Cold Tattoo, Reverend Mr. Black, Jackson by the Kingston Trio, Red Winged Blackbird by Judy Collins, High Flying Bird by Judy Hinsky. All those songs, I really liked those songs. So how would I know that many years later I would actually meet Billy Ed and get a chance to do a tribute album to him? Big thrill, huge thrill. And then besides Dylan, of course, like many, many other folks, what was the other big influence? 1964 that came around. Well, here it is right here. I bet you know who they are too. That's correct. And that was a huge influence on me and about a million other people because they changed music in a big way, and popular music particularly. So there you go. By the time I was in high school, I was playing. I was played by myself mostly, and I got my first job singing when I was about 15. Started making money. I knew that was a possibility. And then in high school, I got in with some other people, 3 other people, and we formed a jug band called the Raggedy Sometime Band. And one of the people that were there, we got a job actually, playing at a local coffee house. And here they are. Here's the Raggedy Sometime Band right here. That's me there with the mandolin. And on the other side with the guitar is a fellow named Ray Wiley Hubbard. His name was Ray Hubbard back then. He picked up the Wiley somewhere along the way. That's his real name, of course, but he started using it. And we had a lot of fun. We played every night, 6 nights a week at this coffee house. We were the house band opening for other people like Jerry Jeff Walker, Michael Martin Murphy. In my high school, weirdly enough, in 5 years, Michael Murphy was the oldest, Michael Martin Murphy, who did Wildfire and all the songs that he did. Second was Ray Wiley Hubbard. Third was me. And fourth was a guy named Chuck Stevenson, who later became known as Buckwheat Stevenson. B.W. Stevenson had a hit, My Maria. 5 years in one high school. All those people ended up having songs on the radio. So that's pretty odd, but that's the way it went. By the way, in 1965, right before, when I was, a year before the Raggedy Sometime Band, another thing, I went to Bob Dylan in concert. And this was a big deal because it was in Dallas, was after his Austin concert. It was just after he went electric. And he had been booed in New York, been booed in LA. But in Texas, he didn't get booed. And in Dallas, I don't know why, but first half he was acoustic, second half he was playing with the Hawks, which are the band. More about them later. And I loved it. I went to it with some friends, and it was a super deal for me. I remember it very well, 1965. But Raggedy Sometime Band, back at the Rubaiyat, I learned music lesson number 1. We made $40 a week a piece for 6 nights a week. There's either 2 or 3 sets, I can't remember. We asked the owner after 3 months to raise it to 45, and he fired us. That's music lesson number 1. But you know, $40 a week sounds like idiotic amount of money. However, if you look at inflation, that's about $300 a week for 6 nights. There are a lot of people I know nowadays who, you know, don't make much more than that, sadly, playing music today. So it got me up to high school there. Then I went to college. I kept playing music, and I started writing more songs in college. And 2 other things happened that really influenced me. They weren't musical, but they were very, very important. And I went to Europe on a bicycle trip with a friend of mine. We went around Europe for 3 months. I met people, I heard music from all over the world, and it was really influential to me. Then I went around the United States the next year. It's 1968. Started out at the convention in Chicago, went all the way to the West Coast and all the way back. We were going to go up to New York, but our car broke down. But I found out a lot of things, and I had long hair back then, and we got spit on in the South in our car just because of what we looked like. And it gave me a tiny, tiny glimpse of what it must be like for people to judge you by your looks, by the color of your skin or whatever. Of course, all I had to do was cut my hair, and I was in free and clear, but other people, I realized, couldn't do that. Big lesson to me. I also went to Europe the next year, went to Greece, got a job singing there, and I could have stayed there. I was making $3 a night and only spending $2 a day. So anyway, there you go. Takes me up to 1969. I recorded my first record. It was an album of hymns for a church. And the fellow I mentioned before, Kay Kaiser, was a member of that church, and he ended up getting involved in producing it, co-producing it. This was the record. There it is. It was called Peace and Joy and Power. That's the record. On the inside, there's a photo of me, which led me to show business. There I am, underneath a tree. Show business lesson number 2. They sent the photographer to my college, and we were taking pictures all over campus. One time he got that, I don't know, it wasn't that tree, but it was another tree. He said, get up on the limb of that tree. Take your guitar up there. I did. And then he said, just act naturally. I realized, okay, that's showbiz lesson number 2. That's the way it works. Get up in a tree with your guitar and act natural. 1970, by the way, when I was in college, I also went to my first Grateful Dead concert a long time ago. I found out later by looking. You can find out everything, of course, about the Grateful Dead. I found out later that it was the first time they ever sang Addicts in my life, that particular concert. 1970, I recorded my first record of original songs that weren't hymns, and I did it out in Los Angeles, and it was released in 71 on Daybreak Records, RCA subsidiary label. There it is right there. And that's the cover of me walking the wheat fields, not wheat fields, but fields in Illinois near where I went to school. That was my first, and we're talking about first still, that was my first, commercial, whatever you want to call it, original record. Then in 72, I moved to West Virginia, and I recorded here. I was here after 2 years, I came here as an artist in residence. I stayed here 2 years. I didn't really leave much. After the second year, I got back into, it was about 1974 then, I got back to traveling and singing and writing songs and performing in clubs and coffee houses and concerts and so forth. And I got a manager out in Los Angeles, and I'd written some songs. I wrote one that was a humorous song, a funny song that I knew it got big reaction. I wrote it in my van as I drove from West Virginia to Boston. Got a big reaction at Passine where I played there. So I played it out at McCabe's guitar shop in Los Angeles. What I didn't know is that they recorded that concert. They didn't ask us, they just did it. So we found out they recorded it. We said, well, at least give us a copy of it. So we did. My manager said, we ought to release this song called Junk Food Junkie because it went over very well. So we overdubbed bass and drums on my original guitar, and there was a lot of laughter and applause, but I think we sweetened it up a little bit anyway. And we put it out ourselves because we couldn't sell it to anybody, and we got Rick Griffin, who was famous surf cartoonist, to do the cover. There it is, Junk Food Junkie right there. And that's what the original cover looked like. Later, we got Warner Brothers to sign me, and it went up the charts, and it got to number 9 overall. I had written that song because when I lived in New York City in 1970, I worked at a coffee house. It was also organic food restaurant. So that's first I didn't know what organic food was. Definitely knew what junk food was. So I put those together, and that's where I came up with that. Otherwise, believe me, I didn't eat any organic food when I growing up in Dallas. So now we're all the way up to 1976, and that got me a couple of things. Another couple of showbiz lessons. I was in People magazine. They did a feature on me. Came to West Virginia to do a feature on me when I lived up in Barber County, and they asked me some questions. And one of them was, how much money do you make? And the other was, are you going to have children? And on both those questions, I told the reporter, well, that's none of your business. But I realized that's not the way it works. So she said, you better tell me something or else we're going to make it up. And there'll be something in the magazine. I said, well, make it up. And so they did. Lesson number 3, showbiz lesson number 3. And then showbiz lesson number 4 was right after that. One of the first talk shows I did Merv Griffin show, who I really like Merv. I did the Johnny Carson show, but Johnny wasn't there. It was a guest host, Joan Rivers, who came out. My sister, I think, was 16 or something at the time. She flew out to see me. She was in the audience. Joan Rivers comes out, and she says, this is really special tonight because everybody on this show are really friends of mine, good friends of mine. I never met Joan, not that night, not any other time, not before, not after, not during. So, showbiz lesson number 4. 1976 also, when I had that song on the charts, a friend of mine worked with Disney Records, and he is another first, all these are first, believe it or not, first Disney recording, which led to a lot of others, was a campaign they had in 1976, Winnie the Pooh for President, with Sears. So they needed a song. They had some written, but they didn't like them. So my friend said, I got this buddy of mine is a songwriter, and his boss at the record label said, who cares about your buddy? But he said, wait a minute, he's got a song on the charts, it's number 2 on KHJ in Los Angeles right now. So the guy said, oh, different story. Tell him to bring something in. So I brought it in, they liked it. This was it. Here it is with a full, what do you call it? Coloring book in there. That's probably a collector's item now. A coloring book on the campaign of what voting is like, how to elect a president. Maybe we need to bring that back again. Pooh might be a write-in candidate we could consider. But this was 1976, and it was my first a chance of writing a song for Kid Song like that. I ended up having to sing on it. I wasn't going to sing on it because Sterling Holloway was Pooh. He was going to sing. Another fellow was Piglet, but the other fellow couldn't sing well enough, so they asked me to come in. So I sang the part of Piglet. Sterling Holloway sang the part of Pooh. We were nominated for a Grammy. Went to the Grammy Awards that year. We did not win. And you got a bunch of winners coming up after me here with Kathy and Michael. So don't worry, I'm not the winner. I'm the guy that gets nominated. That was my first kids recording. Ended up doing a lot more. By the way, at that my claim to fame here at that Grammy Award, I saw Michael Jackson, and I went up to him only because he had sung Junk Food Junkie on his television show, the Jackson 5 television show, and he was very nice to me. So I appreciate that. Somebody who was nothing. Well, let's skip all the way to 1981. And Mountain Stage was my first. Mountain Stage was 1981. The first regular one was 1983. My first musical, Paradise Park, which was put on down at Theater West Virginia in 2018. Those are all the firsts of all my music career that I could think of. And now I'll go to my favorites quickly, and the future won't take long. Don't worry, we're almost done here. My favorite, I want to say some of my favorite performers that really influenced me a lot. Bob Dylan already mentioned, the band, the Beatles. The band's important because we had the band on Mountain Stage. That was a huge deal for me. The Dillards, great bluegrass band from Missouri. The Byrds, of course. We had several members of the Byrds were on Mountain Stage, which was a big deal for me. Paul Simon, Colonel Ray and Glover. I don't know if you ever heard of them, but Blues, Rags, and Hollers, big influence on me. Odetta, who we had on Mountain Stage, big influence on me as I grew up, as was Albert King, great blues player. Jimi Hendrix when I was in college. Flatt and Scruggs, I listened to them a whole lot. And I always liked live records, and that, of course, influenced Mountain Stage because Mountain Stage is obviously live, always. Joni Mitchell was another one, and Randy Newman. And Randy Newman is really important because the band and Randy Newman, people ask me, what's your favorite Mountain Stage show? There's been 950 of them now. Well, that's really difficult. The most important one, obviously, and one of my favorites, was the show with REM in 1990. Opened a lot of doors for us, and it was great. Cool show, too. But 1996, the band was on with Cassandra Wilson, Dan Zanes, and Roy Block, and their performance was great for me, the whole thing. You've seen The Last Waltz, even if you don't know the band. Perhaps you know them for that reason. 1999, one of my very favorite shows, perhaps the favorite. Randy Newman, Richard Thompson, Mattapat from it's a French-Canadian group from Montreal, and Eddie Reader, Clive Gregson, and Boo Hewerdine from Scotland and Great Britain. And that was one of my favorite shows of all times. Some of the folks, my favorites, who were very influential and favorite when I was very young, that we had on Mountain Stage later. I just thought I'd mention Gordon Lightfoot, Ian and Sylvia, both were on. Joan Baez, Judy Collins, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Dave Van Ronk, Tom Paxton, John Stewart, Bob Gibson, Odetta I mentioned, and Doc Watson, and there were some others. And if I'm mentioning my favorite things of all time, musically and all, I have to talk about, of course, my wife and my kids. Can't ever mention anything favorite because that's my favorite things of all my things. Future, it's time to go to the future. Well, that's going to be very short because, you know, when you get my age, there's a lot of firsts, but there's not a whole lot of future left. But you don't feel that way when you're, you know, when you're my age. As Oscar Wilde said, the tragedy of old age is not that one is old, but that one is young. So I'm hoping now, had Paradise Park produce, like to see it produce again. Just finished writing songs for another musical for kids with Daniel Boyd, Danny Boyd, who wrote Paradise Park. So I'm looking forward to doing that. Record again, I don't know if I'll ever record again. Perform some more. I may perform now and then, but obviously I am the submerging artist, so I will not be performing a whole lot. And what I will be doing is a lot of this. What do you think that is? Yeah, buddy. There it is. Got a little place on the Gauley River. Gonna catch me some smallmouth, some other kind of fish down there, and have a good time. And as Bob Dylan said, it's not dark yet, but it's getting there. Thank you guys very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about music, my life, my first, my favorite, and my future.
Thank you, Larry. That was great. And even though Larry only referred to a couple of his showbiz lessons, at Mountain Stage, where I work my day job, he teaches us new showbiz lessons every day. One of my favorite being a talking dog doesn't need to give a good speech. Next up, we have Michael Cerveris. And Michael is a kind of a three-threat kind of a character there. He is a musician, a stage actor, and also a screen actor. You may have seen him in Bob Mould's touring band, or he does a guest vocalist with They Might Be Giants on a song from one of their latest releases. In theater, he has won Tony Awards for his portrayal of John Wilkes Booth in Assassins, and also for his latest show, Fun Home. Along with the cast, were awarded a Grammy for his portrayal of Tommy in The Who's Tommy. On television, you may have seen him in Fringe, Gotham, Fame, Mindhunters, The Tick, or in film, The Ant-Man versus the Wasp, or The Mexican, just to name a few. So that gives you a pretty good idea of the kind of work that he's been doing the last few decades. One of the most interesting things about Michael was that in 2016, when West Virginia were ravaged by floods, Michael put on a concert that turned into a CD in New York at Joe's Pub with people like Larry Groce, Tyler Childers, Ona, Suzy Roach, Lucy Wainwright Roach, Nellie Mackay, just to name a few there, Laura Cantrell, and all the proceeds went to benefit flood relief victims. So Michael, even though he was born in Bethesda, he was raised in Huntington, West Virginia, and we're glad that he still considers West Virginia his home place. So please welcome Michael Cerveris.
Okay, so Jeff and I talked about how to do this three things thing. I've been looking forward to doing this for years. Jeff and I have been talking about this, and I was really looking forward to it being in Charleston, because I'm always looking for any opportunity and any excuse, any reason to get back home to West Virginia. But his suggestion, which I thought was a great one at the time, and probably is a great one, was because my life is kind of divided into so many different things, and I've got my life as an actor, my life as a musician, my life just as a person. He said, well, why don't you do 3 firsts, 3 favorites, and 3 futures, and just do a little bit of each one, which sounded like a great idea and seemed like it would maybe make it easier. But I just tried doing the 3 firsts, and that timed out to about 20 minutes in itself. So apparently I'm not able to be brief as I thought. So I'm going to try a different approach now that I've used up like 2 minutes just telling you that. So I'm gonna start with firsts first, and talk about my first experience on stage. I grew up in West Virginia in Huntington. My dad was a teacher at Marshall, but for a couple years before that, he had gotten his master's at WVU, but his first teaching job was in St. Louis at Webster College. And so my first couple years of like kindergarten and first grade were in St. Louis, and that was where my very first stage appearance happened. And it was in a production at the college, as my dad was a professor there, a music professor there, and so as his child, I got kind of roped into, they needed some kids for the student production of A Caucasian Chalk Circle by Bertolt Brecht. And so, I became one of the kids. And when your very first experience on stage is not like a school play or Guys and Dolls or, Snoopy, but it's Bertolt Brecht, Caucasian Chalk Circle. I think that explains a lot of my career ever since. It's in the play, there's a character of a little prince who's sort of the center of the dispute of the play, and the little prince has a group of little friends who play with him in this one scene. I was not playing the little prince, I was playing one of the little friends, and the Little Prince is in a bunch of scenes and has lines and has, he's a real character. The friends are basically just a little mob of playfellows. So our job basically was to hang out backstage with our wrangler and play games and, have fun, and then we'd go out and do this one scene and kind of do a little ring around the rosy around him, I think, and then come off stage. And I loved it. I loved going to the theater and being around a bunch of other kids and basically having playtime. And the part of being on stage was kind of the least important part of the whole night to me. Hanging out with the other kids was what I really enjoyed doing. So at some point, I don't know if the kid playing the Little Prince got another job or just got tired of it, but he left. And they asked me if I would like to step into the role of the Little Prince. This would be like a big deal because now I would be the central figure in this play and I would have scenes and lines and all this stuff. And my answer was no. I did not want to do that because I didn't want to have to learn lines. I didn't want to have to be responsible. I didn't want to have to do all this other stuff and be standing out front with the light shining on me. And I just wanted to hang out with my friends and play and do all the fun communal parts of it. And I think, that may be the last time in my career that I turned down a better job. But I think it kind of shows something about me that has been borne out over time, that I'm much more comfortable in an ensemble group kind of feeling, even if it is a production or performance where I'm playing a title character or a character who's out in front. The more I can make it contribute to making it feel like an ensemble piece and a group achievement, the happier I am. I haven't really, despite the fact that I've been fortunate enough to get singled out at times for recognition, the parts of the whole thing that make me the happiest are the working together with other people and the collaborative part of it. I had a teacher who told me that I wasn't ambitious enough to ever have a career as an actor, and I think they're probably right. I think I've kind of succeeded in spite of myself as much as anything else. I don't like the competitive aspects of the business part of making theater. I like the collaborative part, and that's true in music too, I think, and true in all of my life, really. So I think that's what that little first kind of makes clear. Okay, for my favorite, I think I'll talk more about my life as a musician. I grew up always loving music and playing music pretty much as long as I was acting. I grew up in a musical household with my father being a classical pianist and educator, and I think from him I got a really specific idea of who deserves to call themselves a musician, and it was somebody who, like my dad, had devoted his entire life to studying and mastering his instrument and could sight read music, dense classical music and new music theory. And I didn't have any of that skill. I had studied a little bit, initially violin when I was in fourth grade, but in fourth grade violin's not the cool thing to play, so I switched to guitar to finish out the year that my dad had asked all three of us kids to give to studying an instrument. So I did that, and then kind of put it aside after my year was up, and didn't really pick it up for a few years, and then kind of picked it up again when I was around, I guess, 11 or or maybe more like 13, and kind of self-taught myself again. So I've always felt like I'm a self-taught musician because I am. I can a little bit sight read for music, but I really learn most things by ear, which meant that when I was learning stuff, when I had this band in junior high school called Ukiah, named after a deep cut from a Doobie Brothers Captain Me album. I was the one who could figure out everybody's parts by listening to the record or sticking my ear in the radio and figure it out, and then go into band practice and teach everybody what their parts were. But I still didn't really feel like I deserved to call myself a musician. It wasn't until I was actually playing the part of musician, Ian Ware, on Fame, and living in Los Angeles, where you kind of are considered to be what you pretend to be in Los Angeles. And I was playing this English guitar student and meeting a lot of guys who were musicians and like making a living of sorts as musicians. And I kind of realized, well, I mean, I'm not the greatest guitar player in the world, but I can play as well as this guy can, and he's got a 3-record deal. So maybe I should stopping myself from playing and just acknowledge my inabilities and just do it anyway. So that's when I started finishing the first songs that I was writing and putting bands together, and all of that led eventually to me having this current band that I have now, Loose Cattle, and that led to my favorite experience, which was coming back. It's so great being on this program with Kathy Mattea and Larry Groce, because Larry was really instrumental in me having this favorite experience. My first time on Mountain Stage was as part of Mountain Stage came to Huntington to record their broadcast as part of the Martial Artist Series. Martial Artist Series had been this thing that had exposed me to so much great culture when I was growing up in Huntington as a kid. You know, symphonies and ballets and national tours of Broadway shows. Like the first chance I had to see a lot of that, artistic experience was because of the Martial Artist Series. And so now I was going to get to bring my band back home to the Keith Albee Theater, where I had worked as an usher and a popcorn popper and a ticket taker and a projectionist as a kid. And I was going to get to stand on that stage with my band and play music I had written, and be treated as though I was a proper musician, and got to stand on the same stage as Arlo Guthrie that night. And Larry talked to me about my music and didn't really talk all that much about my acting career. I mean, mentioned it, but that wasn't why I was there. I was there because I was a singer and a songwriter, and I was doing it in my hometown for Mrs. Parsons, my junior high music teacher. That experience is one of my favorite experiences in acting or music or life. It just kind of combined all those things, and to get to do it at home just meant the world to me. So it was definitely one of my favorites. The future. I have lots of thoughts and hopes and dreams and plans for the future. A lot of them are being kind of turned topsy-turvy these days. My business of acting and being on stage, the future for that is not terribly clear at all at the moment, and is not going to be for a long time. And I've been fortunate that I'm doing a lot more work in television and film these past 5 or 6 years especially. And those are businesses where it will be easier to come back sooner, and there's clearly a demand for it since we're all spending a lot more time at home and on our devices and want new things to watch and think about. So I am excited about a series that I'm in and was supposed to have already, I was supposed to be like halfway done filming it now. I'm not allowed to talk about what it is exactly, but I can say that it's a new series for HBO that I think will be a pretty great one. And it'll allow me to be part of a big ensemble like I was saying I like doing. Telling some really interesting historical stories from a time beginning soon after the Civil War, and looking at how so much of that time, the seeds of our current situation on a lot of levels were sown and put into place there, and systems put into place there. And then so I think, I'm hoping and I'm expecting that that's going to be a pretty exciting thing to be part of, and I hope to get back to work on that. We're hoping in the fall that we get to start filming that again. So there's that. Musically, my band Loose Cattle finished a record that was supposed to have come out in April, but that turned out not to seem like the best time to be trying to put a record out. So I'm not sure when that's going to come out. In the meantime, we've been doing a lot of work. I'm doing some writing, and we've been recording remotely. I'll record something at home, a little scratch demo thing, and I'll send it to our drummer, and he'll put a rhythm track down and send it to the bass player, and he'll add his parts, and then Kimberly Kay, my co-band leader and co-lead singer and writer, will put her vocals on, and so we've been sort of cobbling things together that way, and we have some music that we're going to release in the weeks and months ahead. What we have to figure out is, should we keep that record as it was? Will it seem like too much of a artifact of a different time, or will it still feel like it has something to say to us now? Do we hold on to it for a while later, till a time when it could feel a little more easy to enjoy? Or do we add the new stuff that we're doing now and make one bigger record of it? Or do we just release these things as just singles, or an EP that's more kind of talking from this moment in time? I don't know. We have a lot of things to figure out, but I'm looking forward to figuring those things out. I'm really looking forward to getting back together with the band as soon as I'm able to. They're all based down in New Orleans, so I have to be able to get down there first. We last Labor Day, we did this tour around West Virginia, and had the best time, and I was really looking forward to doing that again this year. So I will continue to look forward to doing it soon. And then I guess the bigger picture, my future plans, part of it involves making a real home, a definitive kind of home. I've had so many homes, even in West Virginia. We lived in 3 different places for the 15 years that we were there, and I grew up there. I still feel like West Virginia is absolutely my home, where I learned so much of, who I am and how the world is. But I also have had a home here in New York for 20 plus years, and I have a home in New Orleans since 2011. I first went to New Orleans not long after Katrina, but I bought a house there in 2011 because I loved it so much and was spending so much time down there and had so many friends down there. And that's become my home that I go to when I'm not working. And it's where the band is all based nowadays. So that really feels like a home also. But I've also, during part of the lockdown here, after having spent a month or so in New York, I went up found a place up in the northern Appalachians to rent for a couple months, and just lived out in a pretty remote part of northeastern Pennsylvania, where my neighbors were mostly trees and groundhogs and deer, and I loved being back in the countryside so much. I mean, living in Huntington, we weren't out in the country really, but just being in the mountains again felt so good and reminded me how much of my core is still in those Appalachians. So I really have a renewed dream of having a place that I can go to in good times and bad times. That's and I would love it if it were in a part of West Virginia. It's just, I've been reminded lately of how much home is still with me. So that's a big part of my future. And then the biggest, grandest part of the future, I think, for me, is a dream I have of us really learning from this very painful moment in our country and in the world. It's painful to us because we, white people, have had the opportunity and the privilege to not suffer the pain that our black and indigenous and people of color friends and neighbors and fellow people on this planet and in this country, the pain that they've been suffering in big and small ways for generations, we've been able to escape and not really have to acknowledge our overt or implicit contributions and the things that we've done to allow, either actively or passively, to allow the injustice and racism that's been at the core of our country for so long, since it began. The things that we've allowed to continue to be. And if there's a bright spot to what we're going through right now, it's that there's no excuse for not knowing anymore. And there's such an opportunity and a movement towards looking at ourselves and looking at each other and asking ourselves hard questions about who we are and what our responsibility is to each other, and what we've done or not done to let things be so unfair for so long, for so many people, and what we can do today and tomorrow and for years and years and years to come to change that really. And I do find reasons for hope and reasons for change, and a lot of them rest with young people, but it doesn't let us older people off the hook. We can still learn, we can still change, and there are people out there who want us to and want to help us do that. So we don't necessarily deserve their help or compassion and understanding, because we haven't always given it as freely as we should have, but we have a chance to do it now. And that's what my plan is, anyway, to imagine and work for a future that is not racist, and a country that is not racist, and a society that lifts everybody up equally and values everybody equally. And that's the future I want to see, and that I'm committed to joining with people who want to make that happen. And that's that.
Thank you, Michael. And we'll all keep our eyes out for that next show on HBO coming up. Our next guest is country superstar Kathy Mattea. You don't really need to give too much introduction for her. Everyone knows her hits, 18 Wheels and a Dozen Roses, her Grammy Award winning Where Have You Been? But let me just tell you a quick story of the first time I met Kathy. I was working with the West Virginia Music Hall of Fame on a documentary about Appalachian or West Virginia artists, and we interviewed Kathy. She was one of our first interviews on the project, and she was doing a show at the Clay Center that evening, and we went in to one of the rooms and were set up for the interview, and her tour manager, Don London, told us that she had about 30 minutes or an hour, and she stayed and talked with us for 3 hours while he knocked on the door, and I thought to myself, I could listen to her talk all day long. So now you'll get the opportunity to tell us about her first, favorite, and futures. Please welcome Kathy Mattea.
Hi, this is Kathy Mattea, and I wanted to say thanks to Jeff, especially for inviting me to be part of Three Things during this virtual FestivALL while we're all sort of recovering from COVID and trying not to get sick. I'm so glad we could do this way, even though it's a little daunting for me to not have your voices coming back at me and be in the room with you. But here goes. My subject for my three things is the magic that happens when people sing together and how that's kind of been a thread running through my life. And the first time I remember kind of getting the lightning bolt of what it meant for us all to sit together and sing was over in Greenbrier County. And I was 10 years old, and I'd gone to Girl Scout camp at Ann Bailey, which I don't think is there anymore, but is just the most beautiful setting up in the mountains. And I had been this kind of awkward kid, I was the whiz kid in my community and my family. I was real smart, and I skipped the first grade, but I was a little bit kind of behind emotionally. So I could never figure out how to fit in. I didn't know, I kind of felt like all the other kids had some secret way of communicating, and I could not figure out what this was. So I would just be kind of out of sync a lot of the time. And I discovered at Girl Scout camp that if you had a guitar and you knew how to play all the songs, everybody gathered around and wanted to sing. So not only did I not have to try to figure out how to, what I was missing to try to fit in with other people, I also got to be the facilitator of this connection between people. It was like discovering some magic that you didn't know existed, that you got to be for other people, that you got to conjure for other people. And I became on fire, completely obsessed. I wanted a guitar more than anything in the world. And God bless them, my mom and dad got me a guitar for my birthday that year. And so I just became obsessed. And I started playing and singing everywhere I could. So my best experience was singing along. Probably the one experience with it that I would highlight from my whole life is a moment many, many years later. And I had gone to school at West Virginia University and joined a band there, and we all started playing together. And these guys taught me about writing music and about the joy of playing together. And so then at a certain point, we sort of all went our separate ways. And so some friends were having a reunion, and they lived up in Greenbrier County. A friend had a family farm up there. And So we were going to have this big reunion of all of us that lived together on this street in Morgantown. And it was this sort of extended family where there was a group of houses, and over the course of maybe 10 years, people would move out, and then another friend would move in, and then these friends would stay, and these friends would graduate and move out, and then other friends would come in. So we had heard about people who came before us, and the people who came before us stayed in touch with the people who still lived there, and they heard about us and the band. And we had this little bluegrass band, and we wrote songs about all the people that lived on the street, and then we would sing them. We would sing into the night on the weekends, and then we made up verses about everybody, and then everybody learned their own verses, and then all of a sudden people would show up on a Friday afternoon, and there'd be so many people in the streets that the police would come and just put barriers up and block off the street from traffic. The kegs might have had something to do with that, but I prefer to think it was the music. Anyway, finally the police said to us, look, we love this. We're glad you're doing this, but there are bars in this town that are made for bands like you and for experiences like this. Will you please just give yourselves a name and move into the bar so that our jobs can be easier? So we did. And that's kind of how my first band came to be. So we were going to have a reunion after, I don't know, it was many years. I was probably in my 40s at that point. And it was going to be the first time that we had all gotten together in one place. And so we were going to go up for this weekend and camp out in Greenbrier County on this farm and all hang out. And so my mom had Alzheimer's at the time. My dad and my mom had both been diagnosed with terminal illnesses within weeks of each other. My dad got diagnosed with terminal cancer, and my mom got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So when my dad died, I went home a lot because I wanted to spend as much time with my mom as I could while she still knew me. And I thought, I'm one of the people on this earth that she still recognizes. And so I thought, I really want to try to savor that as long as I can. So I was coming to this reunion, and I spent 3 or 4 days at my mom's house on the way. And I had ordered a guitar, a small model, a Taylor, for a friend of mine's kid who was getting into playing guitar. And I was going to bring it up to this reunion and give it to him. So I ordered it and had it sent to my mom's house. And it came in one day while I was there visiting. And I thought, well, I should probably see if it got damaged or whatever, make sure it's okay. So I got it out of the case and I tuned it up and I hit a chord, and my mother, like Pavlov's dog, went, Rita was 16 years, hazel eyes and chestnut hair. And I about dropped my teeth. Because my mom never broke into song. My mom, for my whole life, never sang. She would say, oh, honey, I can't carry a tune in a bucket. And I found out years later that she had been asked by someone to please not sing when she was young. So she closed her mouth and she didn't sing. And by the time I came along, this was years before I was born, by the time I came along, she wouldn't even sing happy birthday. So what'd she get for a daughter? A border collie in human form that just wants to sing all the time. My poor mother. I think about what hell that must have been for her. But that day, this lovely woman, Nancy, who was taking care of my mom, we had some angels, angel caregivers. She was there with her and she said, oh, honey, that's right. We've started this since you've been here visiting the last time. People with Alzheimer's get restless around dinner time. And your mom knows she should be doing something, but she doesn't know what it is. So she gets kind of restless. So what we've started doing is we sit her down at the kitchen table while we make dinner. And we put the boombox in the middle of the kitchen table and we play your greatest hits album. And we just sing and sing and sing. So this was my mother's regular afternoon routine. And the first song on my greatest hits album was Love at the Five and Dime, and that was the first line from the first song. So I got my guitar out that day, and I got my greatest hits CD out. And I went through every song on the CD and sang with my mother all afternoon. And it was the first time in my life I ever sang with my mom. And the joy on her face. There was no self-consciousness anymore. I always tell people, my mom got Alzheimer's and she forgot that she couldn't sing. And so at that point, she just started singing all the time. It was the most beautiful thing. And so powerful. Such a beautiful connection that we were able to make. The last song in the CD was Where Have You Been, which is a song that was a very well-known song of mine that my husband and his friend wrote about my husband's grandma and a moment of dementia in her life. And I could not bring myself to sing that one with my mom, so I skipped that one. But it was a really magical afternoon. And a year later, when she didn't know me anymore, she couldn't make a sentence. She could still sing all the verses to You Are My Sunshine with me. So I would get right down in her face and look her right in the eye. And we just sing and sing and sing. And it taught me something. It made me so happy that I built my life around music, because it taught me that music lives in us in a very deep place, beyond our ability to recognize ourselves or each other. And that it's a very sacred thing. This connection we had when we could not have a conversation still existed. And it was more of that magic. It made me really, really glad I had built my life around music. Whew. And so the future, you know, we're doing this in this format because we cannot gather together because of this pandemic. And so what that means is that there's become this moment in my live show that's like my favorite moment in the whole show. I have this song called 18 Wheels and a Dozen Roses, and it's become a country music standard. I recorded it when I was really young, and at a certain point I realized, oh, wait a minute, this song, everybody knows this song. All kinds of people know this song. People heard this song on the radio, and they've sung along to it while they're driving down the road or in the shower. And I realized what a gift it is to have a song that everybody knows. And so I started getting my audiences to sing. And then I noticed that some people were shy, like my mom, and they didn't want to sing. And so I started talking to them about singing and how important it is and how connecting it is on a visceral level, you know, below all of the thoughts, all of the personality, all of the ways that we think of ourselves in the world. And if we can let go of all of that, we go back to this place where there's nothing but joy and singing. And when you see little kids, you can see that this is true. Kids sing all the time. I have this friend who, when her oldest daughter was about 2, she would, about maybe 4, she would send me this video. She sent me this video one day of her kid standing naked on the coffee table going, let it go, let it go, just completely wide open. And you know, she wasn't thinking about whether she sounded good or not. We are born to sing. So when COVID all started and all the quarantine started, I decided to do a virtual sing-along. So I put up on my Facebook page a challenge for people to go and play 18 Wheels and listen to it and record themselves singing along into their phone. And we compiled it into a big sing-along, a virtual sing-along, and made a video to go with it. And it was just a beautiful, beautiful thing. And when I think about the future, I think about the first time that we will all be able to be in a room together again, experiencing the power of music, simple music, raising our voices together because we can. Not because of how we sound, but just because we can. Because it's our birthright. Because we were born to sing. Because singing together is the most ordinary thing in the world. And in the seed of it is the most sacred thing in the world. That's what I think about when I think about the future. And I long for the time when we can all be together again. And sometimes I think about the first time that I will get to walk on stage and do that. And it is just, as you can see, it's overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. So that's what I'm holding on to as my vision for stepping out into the sun after being in isolation for months and months. So thank you, Jeff, for the opportunity to share my stories. Thank you for creating this series. And love to all of y'all back there in West Virginia especially. I miss you terribly, and I can't wait to see you again. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. We're all looking forward to getting back out there. I would like to thank my guests tonight, Larry Groce, Michael Cerveris, and Kathy Mattea. I would like to thank everyone at FestivALL, Maria and Mallory. And I would like to thank all of our sponsors for helping us continue to do this show. Hopefully we'll be able to do it in person soon. But until then, continue to check out more of VirtuALL. Thanks, everybody.
1, 2, 3, 4. When I was young, I had a lot to say. So I learned how to sing, I learned how to play. You said you were mine when you heard my song. After all these years, you still sing along. The first time, the best time, the good times to come, those three things will